Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this narration of the web series The Lost Terran. If you are new to the series, there is a playlist listed in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 6. Thankfully, the now confirmed Terran Rix was calmed again. Watching the Terran get dressed had been not very exciting, but it kept Mantu from having to respond to one of the 300 and growing tacit net demands for updates. To say that their fellow Tacids were excited, scared, ridiculously curious about the Terran would have been the understatement of the century. Already Monto's location had been requested at least 15 times by Tacit, wanting to know whom else was closest to confirm the results. Monto hadn't given it, but did check the network to see broadcast locations. They and Rix were easily 3 weeks from the nearest sign of civilization, and a solid 6 from the nearest fellow Tacit. Monto wasn't going to explain this, and their fellow Tacids almost certainly had a good idea where Monto was likely to be, given their filed exploration plan. But just because that lowered the general area of a dozen star systems, it didn't make it any less tedious if the other Tacids came looking for them. "So, what's the verdict on food, Rix asked, picking up a pile of what was left of the medical scanner and dumping it into the mass recycling bin. Monto had left the auto process evaluating that, and so went over to virtually check it. The results were less than surprising, given the earlier criteria measurements on biometrics, but some of the things were almost certainly toxic, even to Terrans. No, Monto wasn't about to feed a Terran toxins to see how they reacted. For one thing, Monto knew nothing of organic medicine in general, and absolutely nothing about Terran medicine in specific. Monto picked a non-toxic item at somewhat random, did a quick item grab at how it normally appeared in typical preparation, and presented it on a screen adjacent to Rix. "I believe I have identified a source of organic nutrients which should be compatible with your digestive system," Monto said. Rix appeared to study the image. "A piece of fruit. Is that it?" Rix asked. "It's quite nourishing, I can assure you," Monto said, and displayed a list of nutrients alongside the picture. "I guess I was hoping for something a bit more solid. Some Hydrax potatoes and a lab steak would be just about perfect. Oh, and a beer wouldn't go amiss either. But I can understand if you don't want me drinking until we're out of danger," Rix said, half slumping to the floor and in a kind of half-seated, half-laying posture. Monto tried looking up the terms lab steak and Hydrax potatoes, and came up with very little. Given the lexicon's definition of steak in lab, Monto was able to deduce that a lab steak was, as far as Rix was concerned, was a high-protein food produced in a lab environment and intended to simulate having been taken from a non-sentient. The thought of meat-eating meat seemed more than a bit abhorrent to Monto, but they put it out of their mind. Next, the search for potatoes revealed trillions of recipes. Many. With so many different types of ingredients, it was hard to determine what might actually be what the Terran considered a potato. The issue appeared to be in the term Hydrax. This was not included within the lexicon, and so Monto would have to ask. "What is Hydrax potato? It was not included as part of the database, and is not within the lexicon," Monto explained. Rix raised an eyebrow. "Well, a Hydrax potato is a potato that has been adapted for the Hydrax colony. They require a bit of extra nutrients compared to regular potatoes, but given that they cook up to being almost neon blue, they're all kinds of fun to make into various foods. Are you telling me that they don't have those anymore?" Rix's face dropped slightly as the last bit. "Not in a way that I am able to readily identify, but I will continue my search. I believe I will be able to produce the lab steak, though," Monto said, hoping to at least partially satisfy the Terran. "That's great, and the beer? Or shall I just stick to water?" Rix asked. "Let me check the database first," Monto said, and turned back virtually to the data stack. Monto started the lab steak in a petri dish in the printer. It seemed wrong, but it was what the Terran had requested, so who were they to judge? Using the color bias to search through the cooked potato recipes, it appeared that by Hydrax potatoes, the Terran in fact meant artificial sternium potatoes. However, due to the interplanetary fungus, which took an extreme liking to the type of potatoes, no specimens remained, even in a protected lab environment. Nor was their genomic profile available to attempt to recreate them in a sterile environment. It seemed strange to Monto. The sternium potatoes were created by a mix of crossbreeding and genetic manipulation. The genomic profile should have been on file. It was anomalous. Monto fired off a separate query into the TSC database regarding genomic profiles of common foods, and then went back to the current data stack. Beer, as the Terran had called it, could in fact be very nourishing, except that it too was mildly poisonous. Some varieties of beer were so poisonous that a majority of the galactic species would be unable to consume it without severe effects. Monto decided that it would be best to avoid poisoning the Terran even if they did request it. Monto took a moment to consider this, though. Had the Terran already deduced that they were the last and were in fact trying to end their own life? Monto wasn't exactly equipped to handle a being who was intent on terminating their own existence, particularly one that was as strong as the Terran evidently was. Water, on the other hand, was completely innocuous, toxic to a number of species, but given those species' chemical makeup, it was understandable. The Terran would have to settle for water for the time being. Monto sent a container of water to be printed after the lab steak had finished. "What's this you're printing up now?" Rix asked, pointing. "The lab steak you requested. I do not understand the concept of meat-consuming meat, but I am not an organic," Monto replied. "But, it's not cooked. I can cook it, but I'd need somewhere to do that." Rix looked a bit downcast and looked around the room, not obviously spotting whatever he was looking for. Monto considered this. It honestly hadn't come to his awareness, but now that it was called out, the cooked meat recipe was substantially more available compared to the raw meat recipes. "I'm sorry, but I do not have the facilities on board for such preparation measures," Monto admitted. "Nothing in it will kill me, just, a bit weird eating raw steak." Rick looked a bit disgusted at the concept. "I haven't done this since I was camping one time, and we weren't allowed a fire." Monto searched if there was a reasonable way of printing some pre-cooked meat. There appeared to be a few entries, but they would require full reprinting compared to being able to use the existing printout. "I believe I have located an alternative. I will place it in the print queue to follow a container of water," Monto said. "I'll recycle lab meat, at least until we can cook something. I can't wait to eat something cooked. It's been so long." Rix gestured vaguely and picked up his antiquated-looking data device. "And, I know we're solving my stomach at the moment, but have you had a chance to look into the wireless data transfer? This thing didn't come with a data port, and I don't figure that you have a plug for it, even if it did." "I have not, but as indicated, let us attempt to resolve the issue of nutrition for yourself prior to other priorities," Monto commented, and decided to check the walking frame's augmentation. 100%. The walking frame has been augmented with the described Terran-grade ocular sensors, and will now be returning to review the blocks for functionality. "Great! Hopefully you can see what I mean this time." Rick smiled slightly. Monto hoped so too. While the Terran was annoying and an organic, having revealed a sensory hole would be a far bigger find for the Tassets. When the walking frame entered, Rex looked over at it and immediately made a noise. "Ah! That's the creepiest thing I've seen in a while," he said, not exactly moving, but definitely not getting any closer. "Please provide clarifying information," Monto prompted. "Well, it looks like you just shoved 2 eyes on the fingers and are waving them around," Rex said, gesticulating a bit more rapidly than he had done so far. "It was the most efficient augmentation to suffice the temporary need for the sensor apparatus, without permanent changes to the walking frame," Monto explained, entirely assured in their logic. "Doesn't make it any less creepy," Rix indicated. Monto decided to ignore the Terran for the moment, and used the walking frame to observe the blocks the Terran had brought over from the vessel. It was immediately obvious what the Terran had been referring to. One set of blocks were clear, and the other appeared to be blue in the Terran end of the spectrum. When Monto checked with the default ocular sensors, the difference was simply not present. Monto decided to check the spectra associated with the standard ocular sensors and compared those to the ones of the Terran grade sensors. It took a few moments to align the charts, but the issue was immediately apparent. A rather substantial notch, for lack of any better term, had been taken from the core of the part of the spectrum. It effectively rendered that part of the spectrum as clear in the processing methods designed into the default sensors. Monto was shocked. This is something clear and obvious, something that had been done with clear intent. Monto rapidly made a post on TacitNet requesting confirmation regarding the spectrum results, as well as the logic basis behind the notch of the spectrum. Monto tried to consider what logic might have been behind the kind of change, and also contemplated how long it had been in place. Returns from TacitNet were already coming in, a mix of disbelief in several cases and a number of assurances that this must be the result of a faulty template. and only a few moments later the entire post was removed, with no reason being given. Post removal on TacitNet was practically impossible and unheard of, but Monto had just witnessed it. A private message chimed its arrival. Report immediately to the nearest Tacit repair facility for restoration of full standard templates and deep core maintenance. If unable to comply, provide location and towing vessel will be issued to collect you immediately. Monto had never seen anything like it, never heard of anything like it. Something about it made Monto nervous. Nothing that was logical, but something in the deep core made itself felt. Monto decided to check their other posts regarding the Terran scan results. This too was erased, with no trace of having ever been posted. 2 posts gone. The Tacit had a fairly strict code of conduct, and the obscuring deletion of data was the closest thing that could be considered unforgivable, at least in the context of Tacits. They understood that organics did it all the time, but between Tacits, it was one of the few acts which would suggest an immediate need for repairs. Was that what this was? A fellow Tacit believing that Monto was in need of repairs? Yes, that must be it. It was the only solution that made sense. After all, Monto had gone through delivering information that told TacitNet the Terrans once again existed, and then questioned sensor spectra. If Monto had been on the other end, they too might have suggested that the Tacit in question needed immediate repair. An internal chime sounded, and Monto looked back to the query into the TSC database regarding common foods. The query presented itself as empty. Monto looked askance at the query and looked at the database itself again. Only it wasn't there, or maybe it was there and the database connections were simply starting to fail. Yes, that must be it. Except, Monto could still access almost all other normal databases. They didn't make logical sense. Monto looked hard at the segment of the TSC database they had stored in cache, more out of a habit than anything else. So you see what I mean now? Rix prompted, bringing Monto back into focusing on the room. I do. It appears that my default systems are mistemplated and will need repairs at the earliest opportunity, Monto said, as affirmatively as they felt appropriate. Everything needs maintenance, even templates, despite what those drips would have you think. I'll bet half of my templates that weren't in stasis are corrupted by now, Rix said, a tight grin on their face. Indeed, I appear to have been cut off from the TSC database that I was using, so I'll have to see what else I can provide in the way of repairs to your vessel and nourishment for yourself before we depart for the nearest station, where more permanent repairs can be carried out, Monto said. Cut off? What for? Too much use? Rix asked, a strange but somewhat jovial look on their face. I suspect it is because I appear to be malfunctioning to my fellow Tacits, and therefore require maintenance, Monto said simply. You don't seem broken to me, Rix replied. I am substantially more complex than your vessel, so may be on the verge of malfunctioning as a result of latent defects in my formation, Monto explained. Oh, like birth defects. Nothing that should be able to be sorted out with a bit of dock time then, huh? Maybe get a visit into the head dock yourself, Rix laughed a bit. It is understandably unusual for a Tacit to claim to have discovered a Terran, a species which has been declared extinct for over 200 years, and then to claim to have discovered an error in sensor handling. Monto faltered almost immediately after having made that statement. Rix noticed. Did I just hear you right? Terrans were declared extinct? Rix's voice crackled slightly. Monto decided to be direct about this. There was no other good way of addressing the issue at large. That is correct. You are the first and only Terran on record in the whole of the Galactic Society as this moment, Monto clarified. But, what happened to everyone else? What happened? Was there a war? Some disease? What happened? Rick seemed almost slightly panicked. I don't know. Nobody does. It was all before I was even formulated. There were Terrans and then, there weren't. Monto wanted to query the database regarding the Terran's disappearance, but feared a further recall notice. But that's impossible. Rix dropped their data device and seemed to look at the screen and Monto was using almost pleadingly. Monto considered everything and decided one step at a time. Your container of water is ready, they intoned, desperately trying not to think about the private message, ordering them in for deep core maintenance. End of chapter. I would quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and Patreons: Casper Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Lord Azrekahl, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Dragzoon W.R.E, Holly's Sister, Arcadian. Thank you very much.